Hi, everybody. Welcome to Save the Frogs Academy. My name is Dr. Kerry Kriger. I'm the founder and executive director of Save the Frogs, and I'm very happy that all of you have joined us today to discuss frog dissections and the problems associated with frog dissections, ecological problems, ethical problems, and I want to start by saying, before we even get into this discussion on frog dissections, what Save the Frogs Academy is and how important it is for people out there, whether you're on the call today or watching this as a YouTube video. We put all the videos of the Save the Frogs Academy classes up to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Save the Frogs. It's extremely important to me personally that people out there in the world who care about frogs and who care about Save the Frogs and promoting frog conservation and making sure the Save the Frogs movement succeeds. It's very important to me that people watch and attend these Save the Frogs Academy classes whenever possible. And currently they're taking place every Sunday at 5 p.m. California time, every Wednesday at 11 a.m. California time, which means that classes can potentially connect to Save the Frogs Academy and show it to their entire classroom on Wednesdays. And anybody, if you're too busy at your work or school to watch during the week, hopefully you can attend at least on Sunday night. And anybody out there who wants to volunteer for Save the Frogs, and anybody who says they want to help out, the number one thing that you can do for Save the Frogs is to be on the Save the Frogs Academy calls and classes, because this is how I can educate you all and pass on my knowledge to ensure that all of you know the methods that we use to save the frogs and to give you many, many ideas on how you can take part. So I strongly encourage anybody listening to this to be on Save the Frogs Academy calls as much as possible. I know that we discuss topics that are not discussed anywhere else, and we deal with amphibian conservation issues that you will not hear dealt with anywhere else, or hopefully you will hear about them more in the future as we spread the word about them. But as of right now, nobody else is talking about these kind of issues, or certainly a lot of the stuff we deal with. So today we're going to be talking about frog dissections, and from my 10 years in amphibian conservation and 5.5 years at Save the Frogs, I know that there are people who love to dissect frogs. There are people who think it's great for kids to dissect frogs, and there are people who think that frog dissections are crazy and shouldn't be taking place. And I'm happy to hear your viewpoints, whatever end of the spectrum or wherever you fall, whatever you think. The goal of this is to facilitate discussion and get people thinking. So I'm happy for you to chat in your questions or your thoughts at any point. And I'm just going to start. We have this webpage, savethefrogs.com/dissections, that I'm going to run you through. And this page can be accessed from savethefrogs.com. If you just scroll down in the left sidebar, you'll see dissections, or just remember savethefrogs.com/dissections. And I'll start out by saying we were hoping to have on a guest presenter, Nicole Green from Animal Learn, and she, for technical difficulties, will not be able to join us today. So we'll definitely get her on in the future. Animal Learn does a lot to make alternatives to dissections accessible to everybody. So we'll talk about that later. So first, I just want to state very clearly that our goal at Save the Frogs is to get frog dissections out of every U.S. public school by 2014. That's not far off. And there's a lot of schools that are dissecting frogs. And I want to clarify something. We're not looking for a ban.
I can't get on.
Hi.
I have a problem.
So
Do you want to hear them?
somehow somebody's sound is getting pumped in here, even though everyone appears to be muted. So if you're on a phone, then please try to keep quiet. I'm not sure why that's happening. So back to what I was saying. We're not looking for a ban. What I seek is our society and people at schools, principals, headmasters, teachers, students, parents, school boards, society in general, being educated enough and caring enough about wildlife to realize it's the 21st century. Things have changed. Frogs are disappearing. Frogs are highly threatened. The trade in frogs, the transport of frogs, where frogs are coming from, how they're getting to the students, causes problems for the ecology and for frog populations. There are ethical issues that may not be turning kids into people who care about the environment. To hand them a frog, a dead frog, and say, this frog is for you, it's for your education. Every kid on the planet gets one dead frog, and that frog sacrificed its life for you to improve your knowledge. Maybe that teaches kids that frogs and wildlife in general are disposable. So as I was saying, we're not seeking a ban. We're seeking an intelligent, caring society who makes wise choices and has thought about the issues. And I know that from my experience, most teachers, they've just not thought about the issues because no one's ever presented the issues to them, or they don't even know there is an issue because the inherent assumption is I ordered this frog from a biological supply company who is doing their best to educate students about biology. I'm sure this frog came from a very safe farm and that it's totally cool to be dissecting this frog, but there are lots of problems. So let's dive right into it. So I've already said our goal is to get frog dissections out of all U.S. public schools. And I'll clarify that further. We'd love them out of private schools too. I'd personally like them to not be in colleges or universities. But public schools is where our taxpayer funds are. So all of us who pay taxes, which I'm a taxpayer and you're probably a taxpayer, our money is probably going in some respect to fund the taking of frogs and the killing of frogs and the teaching to students that frogs are disposable. That's one thing it teaches. And I know that, there are lessons. There are lessons on anatomy and physiology, and I'll get to that. But it's also teaching things that I don't think we should be teaching students. So it's not teaching them a respect for life. And, maybe some kids come away with that, with a wonder, and maybe they do respect that. But overall, it's not teaching that, especially because it's not part of the curriculum. Most teachers, if they're teaching you to dissect a frog, they want you to know what the inside of the frog looks like. They're not incorporating that ethical lesson like this frog had a life, frogs are disappearing, let's care about frogs. It's not even part of the lesson plan. So overall, that's not what's coming out in the classroom. So the other reason why I say US public schools is because these are kids from maybe fourth grade is the youngest I know of. I know there are fourth graders who dissect frogs up to high school. So kids under the age of 18, and there's no reason they need to know what the inside of a frog looks like. Because if they were going into a career where that information were of importance, such as becoming a vet or maybe a frog biologist if you're studying the anatomy of frogs, that's all information you can learn in college when you pick your major, or when you're even better when you're in graduate school and you really, for some reason, your career does require that you know that information. Me personally, I have never dissected a frog, and yet I've made a career out of frog conservation, environmental science, frog biology. So I know 100% certain that it's not necessary to dissect a frog to go into a career where you deal with frogs or environmental science or environmental education. And even if you did use that knowledge of frog anatomy, I cannot think of any one instance in my career where frog anatomy has yielded true benefit to frog conservation. And while it maybe has happened, it's so incredibly rare that to sacrifice millions of frogs a year for that perhaps one person who goes on to a career where they come up with some applicable conservation biology purpose that they needed to have dissected a frog. It's so rare that that happens, and it definitely, the person could have learned that anatomy in graduate school. So let's let them, as I said, we're not looking for a ban. If you really think that you need to dissect frogs or that your student does, let's let them wait until at least college or university or their graduate school where they have an actual use and purpose that's going to benefit their career, which your average student does not. So I'm just going to run you down the SaveTheFrogs.com/dissections webpage, because over the last several years, anytime I have a thought related to this, I put it up here. So it's got all types of information and all types of responses to the kind of objections that I think we're likely to hear. And so that as you go, I guess my goal is to get you in a position, educated enough about the issues and inspired enough that you could write your local school board, contact the principal of your child's school. Maybe you're a student, you can go up to your teacher, and maybe the teacher, they've probably never thought much about this issue. And if they do say, oh, we need to learn about the inside of a frog because lots of kids in this class may want to become doctors, medical doctors, then you'll be able to say, well, they can certainly wait until they get to medical school. And if they dissected a human cadaver, they'd probably learn a lot more about human biology to help humans than dissecting this frog. So whatever you'll hear from someone at the school board or just someone talking in day-to-day life, I want you to be educated and to have hopefully heard that issue before. So first off, how do dissections hurt frog populations? And I want to make it clear. Number one, Save the Frogs protects wild frog populations. While we certainly do care about the rights of individual frogs, number one, we want to keep frog populations alive and healthy in the wild. And dissections, most people don't realize those frogs, they probably did not come from a farm where they were specifically raised for dissections. It costs money to own the land for a farm, to raise the frogs, and it's just not as common. Traditionally in America, they're taken out of the wild, and usually they've been northern leopard frogs. Northern leopard frogs are definitely not as abundant as they once were. And if you think about how many students there are in America and how many schools are dissecting frogs, it's a lot of frogs. So it makes sense that it will deplete wild populations. Now, are there scientific studies that have enumerated how many frogs are taken out of the wild each year? How many schools are dissecting frogs? How many frogs are used at each of these schools? What is the monetary cost to the school for purchasing the frogs? I've never seen a single study. So if somebody out there wants to conduct a study that they think will be original research that will contribute to the base of scientific knowledge, then doing a study on how many frogs are taken out of the wild would be fantastic. But right now, all we have is our basic logic, which says probably at least 10% from my experience of schools are dissecting frogs. And you can extrapolate that, and it's pretty certain. I'm quite certain that that equates to many, many frogs, plenty enough so that you can actually, that it does cause population decline. Now, people say, okay, well, what about the farm-raised frogs? The problem with farm-raised frogs is that we know that farm-raised frogs tend to be raised in crowded conditions, and that amphibians have many infectious diseases. Now, it's not just infectious diseases like they'll get briefly ill and then they'll be fine. These are infectious diseases such as chytridiomycosis, a fungal disease that's wiped out perhaps 100 frog species, amphibian species all around the world. Infectious diseases that are so detrimental to populations that the entire population may be wiped out within a few months of the disease arriving. Diseases for which we have no cure, that we have no way to go out into a wild population and get rid of the disease. So while we could be hopeful that these farmed frogs are not carrying diseases, or that any transport of them will not spread any diseases, and maybe they're arriving dead when they're shipped, but maybe the diseases are still living on dead skin. Who knows? With the sheer number of amphibians that we're shipping around, it's virtually impossible to think that no diseases will get shipped around. If we're shipping amphibians, then we're shipping diseases. And we know so little about diseases. Just a week ago, a paper came out about a second form of batrachochytrium, which is the cause of chytridiomycosis, the amphibian disease that we've known about for 15 years that's been wiping out amphibian populations all around the world. So now, there's a second species, and it specifically focuses on salamanders. Okay, new disease we didn't know about. So even if we were testing any of these frogs, there's so many diseases out there that we've probably never even found out about. We don't know about them. If we don't know about them, we cannot test for them. So that's another reason that the frog dissection trade is harming frog populations. Now, another thing is that frogs may be non-native species. And perhaps, again, maybe the frogs are being shipped dead, maybe they're being shipped alive. But if you ship non-native species around the world, then you're going to get some of these species establishing native populations where they do not belong, and that's going to cause problems. I know that in a lot of places, bullfrogs are used, and that's a whole different issue that I'll talk about. So the bullfrog, if it gets shipped live to a place where it didn't used to live, it could escape or get set free, or the water that it was held in goes out into the environment and spreads the diseases. Now, people may immediately think, and I hear this stated quite often, wouldn't it be great if we could go out into places like California, where I am, where the bullfrogs are, American bullfrogs that are not native, that have established populations? Wouldn't it be great if we could just go out there, catch all these bullfrogs, and use those for dissections? And the problem is there are not companies that are doing that. So, and I personally don't have any plans to start a business of collecting bullfrogs. If someone wants to do it, then yeah, let's talk. But no one's doing that. So it's kind of a moot point. And then it's also coming back to, do we need dissections? Is this even knowledge that students need? And given that they have so few hours at school, if you think about a child starts in kindergarten, they graduate when they're 18 or so from 12th grade, what % of their time has gone into environmental science, environmental conservation? It's such a small proportion of their time, especially how much time went into frog conservation, if any. If they even got 1 minute in their entire 18 years of schooling dedicated to frog conservation, that's probably more than most students get. So if you're going to be spending time teaching your students about frogs, do we want to be teaching them about frog anatomy and what the inside of a frog, what the inside of a formaldehyded frog that no longer even looks like a true frog would look like? Or do we want to take that time and teach them something important, such as frog conservation, to me, it's quite clear. Frog conservation is a far more important topic in the 21st century than frog anatomy. And I haven't even gotten to the fact that many alternatives to dissection exist, some of which may even be better than live frogs, because the live frogs, you've got one chance. You chop it up, you're done. You're throwing it out because it's already been chopped up. So we've got digital alternatives that you can look at on the computer over and over and over again. And I know from personally how I study and how I learn, you show something to me once, yeah, I'll get a little bit of information out of it. If I can look at it 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, I'm going to learn it really well. So it's not even certain that dissecting real frogs is a better educational tool. Yes, it's different. There's different things you learn, and people may say, oh, we use too many computers these days. Kids are on computers all the time. Well, I've been to a hospital and I've seen a machine, I think it was called the Da Vinci, and it costs several $1,000,000, and doctors use it to fix patients. And it's from looking in a computer screen. They're basically operating a computer. So in the 21st century, computer skills are valid skills. So to say that because it's happening on a computer, it's worthless is completely incorrect. So before I continue, and I feel like I haven't even gotten started, why don't you all, if you have a question, if you have a comment, go ahead and send that in. And meanwhile, as I said before, Nicole Green from Animal Learn, for technical difficulties, was not able to join us today, but she has sent in a message, and I'll read it to you. And it's that Animal Learn found in 2012 from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service records that over 300,000 frogs were caught in the wild in Mexico for a biological supply company for American schools. So that's from a single biological supply company. Took 300,000 Mexican frogs out of the wild to send them to American schools. And also something that I don't know much about, I heard about this happening from perhaps Arizona State University. I can't remember. It was some university in Arizona that they still use live frogs for neurophysiological experiments, actually putting electrodes into live frogs and watching them squirm and shake, which I think is pretty crazy. So I want to see if any questions have come in. Okay, no questions, so I guess I'm saying it all. And also, if anyone wants to actually speak into their microphone, then they can go ahead and raise their hand, and I can unmute you if you have something to say. So I'll just continue on down this web page. So we talked about the problems with frog dissections in affecting wild populations. And I came up with the top 10 reasons that schools should not dissect frogs. People like top 10 lists, and there were at least 10 reasons I could think of that schools should not dissect frogs, and I think these hit the most important points. And one is that frogs are the most rapidly disappearing group of animals on the planet. So even if a school wanted to dissect formerly live animals, real animals, does it have to be frogs? Does it have to be the most rapidly disappearing animal on the planet that gets used? Or could it be sheep's eyes? I know that sheep, cows, and some of these farm animals, that they use them in dissections, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's from what I understand, it's stillborn animals. So they were born dead on the farm. They did not have to kill the animal specifically for it, and it's animals that are not undergoing drastic population decline. So of all the animals that a school could choose if they really wanted to be dissecting real animals, it should not be frogs. So if schools out there are really set on dissecting animals, then just pick an animal that's not undergoing population decline. So number 2, most frogs being dissected are taken out of the wild. I only talked about America and Mexico, which is supplying dead frogs to American students, or killing frogs, or not Mexico, but the American biological supply companies are paying people in Mexico to take frogs out of the wild. There's lots of countries in the world dissecting frogs. I know from personal experience in Ghana and in some other countries, and from reports that I've heard from, say, Ecuador, Bangladesh, they ask the student to go out and catch the frog. You're going to be dissecting frogs. Go catch a frog. Bring it into class on Monday. We're going to be dissecting it. So those are frogs that are being taken out of the wild, and they're getting the students to do the dirty work. Number 3, farm-raised frogs have high rates of infectious diseases. We already talked about thoroughly. Number 4, excellent virtual dissection alternatives exist. So it's the 21st century. Lots of computer programs are currently available that teach kids about how to dissect frogs. There are iPad apps, iPhone apps, there's computer programs, there's free software. As I recall, I think it was the University of Virginia has free software. There's actual physical models of frogs that you can get on loan. So Animal Learn has the largest free loan program in the U.S., and it's called the Science Bank. And there's a link on down on this dissections page. Otherwise, type in Animal Learn, one word, ANIMALEARN, or Science Bank, and just do a web search for it. They can actually send you free stuff. They send it to you. You use it in your class, and then you send it back when you're done, just like a library. And they have over 500 realistic models and software that can be borrowed for free by educators and students. There's iPad apps by Frog Guts, FROGUTS, and Punflay, PUNFLAY, Frog Dissection app. Digital Frog 2.5, which we like a whole lot, that I'll talk about in a bit. So there's many, many alternatives to dissection. Even if you do want to learn about frog anatomy, okay, great. Use one of the dissection alternatives. Number 5, few students have any need to know what the inside of a frog looks like. I've already discussed that. 6, if a student plans to be a doctor, they can dissect cadavers in medical school. Discuss that. 7, unnecessarily killing an animal is unethical and teaches students that animals are disposable. So as I said, I'd much rather be teaching students that frogs are important. Here's 10 ways to save them. Let's spend the 45 minutes of the class teaching them that, other than here's a frog, we killed it for you, and you're probably not going to get any conservation knowledge out of this class, but at least you saw what an inside of a frog looks like. So number 8 is what I just stated. Number 9, students should not be forced to be unwitting accomplices in the extinction of frog species. There are maybe 10 or 11, maybe 13, I can't remember the number exactly right now, maybe 13 states maximum that I know of have laws that allow a student to opt out of a dissection. If you're in the other 37, okay, there's 16 states where you can opt out. So it's good to know, and actually we should, and Washington, D.C., you can opt out. And we should put that list on this website. So we will go ahead and do that. But if you're in the other 34 states, you have to dissect that frog unless you want to fail. And that to me is not ethical education. And number 10, this to me is super important. Abandoning your school's dissection program sends a strong signal that you support worldwide amphibian conservation efforts. For me, if we can imagine a USA where no frogs get dissected, that to me makes a lot of people think and say, why aren't we dissecting frogs anymore? And it's a great way to facilitate discussion between teachers and students to say, we're not dissecting frogs anymore because frogs are in population decline and we're doing everything we can to protect them. Now, I believe we have a question from Stephen. Stephen, I'm going to unmute you and, oh, let's see, it came in here. Stephen says, surely some students can argue that it is psychological harm to cut up an animal in which they love that they're forced to mutilate. Yes, I agree. And so I haven't even gotten to that. Students, I know this from being in amphibian conservation for 10 years, and people, just random people that I meet from the public, telling me their experience with dissection. And yes, some students love it. A small proportion love it, but at least 50% do not. And there is a definite contingent of students who are permanently pushed away from scientific careers. They do not ever want anything to do with biology for the rest of their life because they had a dissection class that caused them psychological harm. They were forced to kill an animal, or an animal was killed on their behalf without their consent. And to me, however many students are inspired to go into science because of their dissection class, there are at least as many who are turned off from it. And that, to me, is far more important because no student should be forced to do something that psychologically harms them and maybe turns them off of an entire career. The students who are inspired to go into science by their dissection class, they're probably into science already. And they're probably going to be just inspired. Why don't you tell them the inspiring story of some environmental conservationist who went out of their way to help wildlife, or teach them about some scientist who did great things for society. Maybe that'll inspire the student too. But it's not worth it if some students are permanently put off of biology, and who knows what other psychological harm by having to do something that they didn't want to do. Yeah, and also many students are actually scared to approach teachers about objecting to dissections. So, even if that law exists, students may not know, and they may fear that their teacher will not like them or not respect them, or maybe other students will not respect them. Maybe students will make fun of them. And I actually remember a couple of years ago, I think it was in Florida, that some student objected to dissecting. I'm pretty sure it was a frog, and the teacher threw a frog, a formaldehyded frog, I'm assuming, in the student's face. Like actually put the frog on the student's face. So that's a little over the top, but we can imagine that some students, some teachers will not like the fact that the student is objecting, even if it's their legal right. So let's move on and go to some of these common objections. Surely they must be farm raised, right? That's what teachers say, because teachers have not done their research into the topic. And I know it's just not true. Most of the frogs are not farm raised. Most of the frogs are coming out of the wild. Regardless, no data exists. No laws exist from the government to collect that data. No one's required to turn in that data. So to say that they must be farm raised, even under the assumption that dissecting a farm raised frog is ecologically and ethically fine, which I don't think it is, it's just not a true statement. There's no substitute for the real thing. So we already discussed that there's plenty of digital alternatives. Technology is a skill that's extremely important. And there are studies, I've read master's theses that ask the question, can a student learn more from the digital alternative than from the live frog that you only got to use once and then you had to throw out? And there's definitely no proof or reason to think that the actual frog is going to teach the student more than digital they'll learn something different. You're going to learn something different, but do you learn more about anatomy? Not necessarily. And something I may not even have on this page, and it's the reason that about 20 schools, based on Save the Frogs efforts, 20 schools that I know of, there may be more because sometimes I get reports, oh yeah, my child's school gave up frog dissections 2 years ago because my kid was always talking to their teacher about Save the Frogs. At least 20 schools have given up their frog dissection program based on our efforts. And part of the reason I found out is that schools realize it costs more money to be dissecting real frogs than to use digital alternatives. If you get software, you'll pay one time for that software, and that's the only payment you're ever going to make. But every single frog you're buying costs $5, $6, and that's going to add up. And that's, if it's a public school, that's taxpayer money going to not only cause ecological damage, ethical problems, perhaps psychological damage on a student, and then you're wasting money. You could have saved thousands of dollars for your school. You could have bought your school several new computers. You could have hired tutors, private tutors, to teach those students math, science, whatever. And instead it's going to pay a biological company, a biological supply company that probably does not care at all about frog populations. Those biological supply companies, I can't speak for them all, but I've certainly sent letters to a couple. Their deal is making money. So let's spend the money wisely. And if you want to spend money wisely at a school, your best choice is to not be buying real frogs. So I already talked about dissection software. People may say it's not hands-on, but it's very hands-on. When you're using a computer and you're getting better at technology in the 21st century, technology is of so much value to us when it's used correctly. And this is one instance when technology is being used correctly. It's being used to save frogs. And also of interest to me is that our dissection campaign has gotten a lot of news, worldwide news, that at first kind of blew my mind. I was like, why do so many people care about this issue in particular? And it's because humans are fascinated by technology. And when we realize that technology, as much harm as it can do, that it can be used to actually make the world a better place, that I think is really of a lot of interest to a lot of people in the public. So this dissection campaign, every time we do something, every time a school gets rid of their dissection program and that makes news, that's educating a lot of people and making a whole lot of people think about frogs, the way we treat the environment, etc. So dissection campaign is a great way to get publicity for frogs, which still is an issue. Most people don't know frogs are on the decline. Scalpels in the classroom. I've been in schools where they no longer dissect frogs because they fear having a scalpel in the hands of a student. And I think that's, a pretty good idea to not be arming students with weapons. Let me just check if there are any questions that have come through. Does anyone have questions? Does anyone want to say anything? Okay, so this is coming from Nicole Green from Animal Learn, and who's unfortunately not able to talk to us today, but she's sending me in some info that I had not even thought about. If we think about the millions of animals that are shipped around, they're being shipped using fuel, contributing to global warming. So just the shipping of all these animals is not environmentally friendly. Another thing, formaldehyde, what most of these frogs are pickled in, it's linked to cancer. So we're going to put in carcinogens into our classrooms and tell our students to handle frogs, even if they have gloves on. I know even if you have gloves on, you're still getting all kinds of crazy chemicals potentially on you. Things splash. They're kids. Maybe they're 10 years old. and we're going to give them formaldehyde, which is linked to cancer. Yeah, so Nicole just wants to confirm, or sent me in a confirmation that yes, there are studies that show students who use dissection alternatives perform just as well as or better than students who did a traditional dissection. So you can give as an experiment, you could give half the students in a class the digital alternative or whatever alternative to dissection. You could have half the students do a cut up a real frog, and then you can test them, whatever the actual test. Students in school take tests. What did you learn? And the studies that have come out show that students who did the alternative to traditional dissection learned just as much or more. Choti Singh, Save the Frogs Academy regular and supporter and volunteer, writes in that formaldehyde produces an inhalation risk as well. So it's not just touching it or accidental splashes. You're breathing it in. And I know you're breathing it in because if you smell it, that's what you're smelling. You're smelling formaldehyde. It's going into your body. So that's a great reason not to be dissecting real frogs. Certainly not in giving them to kids against their choice using taxpayer funds. I got a letter a few years back. Dr. Sami Zalat in Egypt estimates that over 1 million Egyptian frogs are taken out of the wild each year for use in university laboratories. And at first, this kind of blew me away, and I thought, could that be right? But I've heard stories from various countries around the world where it's just extremely common for university students to dissect not just one frog, and not one frog for their group of 5 students, but every student is dissecting multiple frogs a year if they're in any kind of biological science. Dissecting in Ghana, as I said, I was in Ghana. We have an international branch in Ghana, and I talked to those university students, and they said the deal was they had to go out and catch their frog, go out, catch a frog from the wild. Good news from the Ukraine. Yeah, it's amazing to me that some countries around the world are just far more conservation minded, far more progressive and ahead of the game than we are in America. In the Ukraine, dissecting frogs has been banned. So I think that's great. No dissecting frogs or voles from wild populations for scientific study and experiments. Signed into law by the president of the Ukraine in 2010. So I was talking before about how no published reports exist regarding the dissection trade, or very, very little info on what is the magnitude of the trade, what are the specifics, what are the species that are being taken. So I came up with a list of questions for teachers, and this is great. Anyone, I think this would be a fabulous master's thesis project to go out, survey lots of teachers, and find out the answers to some of these questions, such as how many frogs per year get dissected in your school? Find that out for lots of schools. What species are they? Where did they originate from? What state, what country, what biological supplier? Are they farm raised or wild caught? Are any disease testing protocols used by the distributors? On this topic, I'll say, I doubt it because our government doesn't require it. And from my experience, if the government doesn't require it, the companies don't implement it. Even if a company knew that it's probably safest to be testing for diseases, if they don't have to do it, they're probably not doing it because it costs them money, and they don't want to spend any more money than they have to. How much money is spent each year on the purchase and storage of these frogs and their disposal? Before I was only talking about how much does it cost for a school to buy a frog. They also have to store it somewhere, and they have to dispose of it properly, and they're paying for all of that. And is frog dissection in your state standard? So some states have requirements that students have to do certain things. And certainly if it's not in the state standards, if the state's not requiring it, then you definitely have that much less reason to do it, because even your state didn't deem it that important. Now, up here I want to mention, because I haven't mentioned them before, the NSTA, National Science Teachers Association, which is a very well-known group nationwide that advises teachers and assists teachers in making sure that students are getting properly educated about science. The NSTA, the National Science Teachers Association, last I checked, they did not have any statement against dissections. As I recall, their stance was not to take a stance, just to leave it up to the teacher. Well, I've given lots and lots of reasons why dissection should be not taking place in public schools. So to me, it's very, very important that the NSTA takes a stand and tells teachers, we do not support dissections. So if anybody out there listening knows anyone at the NSTA or wants to take on a volunteer project by contacting the NSTA or starting petitions to the NSTA so that the NSTA takes an actual stance, because to not take a stance is to condone it, in my mind. If you know that it's happening all over the place and you don't take a stance, then you are essentially condoning it. So it'd be great to get some statement from the NSTA that they no longer support or recommend dissection of formerly live frogs. I also want to say that if you're a parent or a student, there's Freedom of Information Act. If it's a public school, then we have a right to know as taxpayers how that school is, doing business, how much money they're spending, what frogs they're using. And if you send them a request, then they should be forced to give you that information. They may have to do some work to get it because they probably haven't even thought about the problem, but it would be a great way. First is just talk to the teachers and ask them to stop dissecting. But if they won't, then it's good. Get this information, and maybe you can use that information and say, hey, look how much money you're using. Yeah, if anyone is interested in prices at schools, how much, is it cost effective to be dissecting, through traditional method or through alternatives? At the Science Bank, Animal Learn Science Bank, on their website, they do have cost comparison studies you can look at. And so, for the record, the states with student choice laws, these are states where the student is allowed to opt out of dissecting an animal without fear of failure. They will not get an F. They will be allowed to opt out. Those states are California, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Virginia. And I believe the Washington, D.C. District of Columbia. If I didn't say your state, that means that in your state, if a teacher tells a student to dissect a frog, that student has no rights to object. They can probably skip class, but they'll get an F for the class is the most likely result of that, which is definitely not optimal. So let's see, we have some more information coming in about the NSTA, but it hasn't fully arrived, so I'll continue on. I've already given you my thoughts based on my career of never having dissected a frog and it not affecting my career one bit. So I personally know that I've achieved a lot for frog conservation without having dissected a frog. So nobody can ever say you need to dissect a frog to be able to save frogs. India. So I was talking about countries that are well ahead of America. India is definitely on path to, I believe, having no dissections in their universities. I think the government, I don't know the specifics, but the government basically asked the universities to phase out dissections, and that's in large part due to Dr. Krishan Kumar Sharma, who is an Indian scientist who's on our Save the Frogs Advisory Committee, and he's got a video right here on the website you can check out. Let me open it up to any questions again. Does anyone have anything they want to say? I can unmute you if you want to, just give your thoughts, experiences with dissections, anything. Anything to say, just raise your hand and I'll bring you in. So the NSTA, I've learned their dissection policy is just to be sensitive to students who do want to use alternatives. So they're not telling teachers to use dissection. They're not telling students to not dissect. They're just advising teachers and school systems to be sensitive to students. So that at least is a start. Okay, so yeah, on this, I'm not going to read all of these, but we have various messages that have been sent to me over the years from scientists about their experiences with dissections. That it's scientists at universities who are very certain that you can get by, perhaps even better for students and ecology by not dissecting frogs. So they're worth having a look at. Do kids like to dissect? I've gotten lots of letters from kids who just did not like it at all. This top 10 reasons schools should not dissect frogs flyer, there is a flyer. If you click on this, it's a PDF. You can download it. I strongly recommend everybody who is opposed to dissection of frogs, print this out, deliver it to your teacher, deliver it to the principal at your school, post it up somewhere, and it's a good way to get people think. Choti writes in and says that her daughter in grade 7, the science teacher did not even know what species of frog was being dissected. Oh, actually, that was Maya, who asked her teacher, and the teacher did not know. And so that to me is kind of humorous and disturbing at the same time, because isn't science about knowing specifics? And you're ideally teaching a student about all these specifics of what's going on inside of that frog. And yet the teacher does not even know what species of frog it is, which just goes to show how primitive our society is when it comes to knowledge about frogs. Now, of course, there are many people in our society who know a lot about frogs, but in general, this comes back to the point where it's like if you go into a restaurant and they're serving frog legs and you ask them, oh, what species of frog is it? They probably don't know, because to many people in our society, a frog is just a frog. Okay, so please post this flyer. I think it's a great flyer. It definitely makes people think, probably about things that they've never thought about before. Now, so dissection alternatives. Okay, so perhaps you want to learn about frog anatomy and physiology, or perhaps your school still wants to learn about frog anatomy and physiology. What are your options other than real frogs, formerly live frogs? The Digital Frog 2.5, which is made by Digital Frog International, is excellent software that we have checked out and we endorse. You can get a home version, or if your school wants it, a full site license. Last I checked was about $884, which at first you may say that's a lot, but if you consider how many frogs are being dissected, and if you do the math that we're going to be buying $6 frogs for however many students for years and years to come, it comes out to way more than $884. And to help people out, we still have 5 licenses left that if your school, if you're in Canada or the USA and you agree to get rid of all animal dissections at your school, then that Digital Frog International will give you that software for free forever. A full site license, or I'm sorry, I think it is forever. But your principal, your head of school will sign a contract that we have right here that says we're going to stop dissecting animals for 5 years. And this is the digital alternative that has, as I believe, I'm pretty sure more than just frogs. It's got other animals. It's got ecology lessons on it. It's got a lot of information on top of frog anatomy. So if your school wants to get rid of dissections, or if you want your school to get rid of frog dissections, to me, it's best just saying, hey, let's not dissect frogs anymore, or let's not dissect animals. Let's study frog conservation. But if they really do want to be teaching that subject matter, then you can get that software for free. And it's really great incentive for your principal to say, you know what, okay, we'll do that for 5 years. We'll give up a minimum of 5 years. We'll give up animal dissections and we'll use this 21st century technology. So there's links to the Digital Frog websites here and to the contract that your school would sign. And at the very top of savefrogs.com/dissections, there is a link directly to here that says Dissection Alternatives so that you don't have to scroll through this entire page. Now, as I've been saying, there's the Science Bank and Animal Learn, and you can go check out their websites, animallearn.org, and we've got all those links right here. Yeah, animallearn.org, animallearn.org. And to the Science Bank, you can get there, animallearn.org/sciencebank.php, or just come to our website and click through. And we've got some other digital software programs that are listed here. You can click through to all their websites. So we'd love to have your school up on our website as a victory. To me, a victory is anytime a school gets rid of frog dissections. That is a victory. It's a step in the right direction. There are 10,000, maybe 20,000 high schools in the USA. We've gotten 16, 18, or 20 or so of them to give up their dissections, and some middle schools and elementary schools too. So we've got a long way to go, but every school counts. And if you contact schools in your part of the world, I'm sure that you can, with some proper persuasion, and since you're now very educated on the issue, get them to give up their dissection programs, or at least their frog dissection programs. And then we can add you to this page. We've also got lots of links to news, and that may be a good thing to tell a school too. Hey, you know, there's a good chance your school could get a lot of good publicity from getting rid of dissections. Good incentive. And we also have some really cool frog poetry. Actually, I'll recite this one because it was a category winner of our 2011 Save the Frogs Poetry Contest, and I thought it was a pretty amazing poem from India. Frogs, apparently ugly. Man, apparently beautiful. Frog, sacrifice lives on biology trays. Man, learns science, discovers. Still, ugly frog, beautiful man. Science tree spreads out. Root absorbs so many lives, laughs the ugly frog. So I really like that because I'm a scientist. I love science. There's so much good that can come from science, but it can't be blind. We can't just learn for the sake of learning without any consideration for the effect of our actions. And that's what, to me, this poem epitomizes, that we need to be thoughtful, considerate scientists. We need to teach our students science, but let's do it in the most ethical and ecologically friendly manner. So I think that's it from my side of things. This actually right here, I've always loved this photo. I saw this it was actually at I think, a National Science Teachers Association convention that was in San Francisco, and Carolina Biological, who I'm pretty certain is America or maybe the world's largest biological supply company. They had lots of frogs in bags, and this is what you're getting. So that's a northern leopard frog. It was probably live in the wild, and someone caught it, put it in a bag to ship it to some student. And me personally, there's so much more to be learned from seeing frogs out in the wild than the inside of a frog. And lessons for life and inspiration from seeing wild animals. Let's take our kids out into the wild, take them to a stream. Biology, as Nicole Green from Animal Learn just sent in, is and should be the study of life, not death. So let's get students outside into the wild and teach them to respect and appreciate nature and wildlife. Okay, so thanks to Digital Frog International, thanks to the Animal Welfare Institute, who is helping us get that free software for schools, and thanks to Nicole and Animal Learn and all these groups that have created excellent ways so that students can learn about dissections or anatomy and physiology if they want without actually having to kill frogs. So I think I've said everything that I can think of regarding frog dissections. Does anyone have any final questions or thoughts? And you can either chat it in, or I can unmute you if you have anything to say. And while I wait for them, I'll let you know, Save the Frogs is always seeking volunteers. And if this issue is very important to you and you're willing to dedicate some time, to me, ideally 4 hours a week, then we're happy to get you set up, contacting schools, contacting students, contacting teachers, and getting dissections out of schools. I know that our methods work because we've gotten 20 schools to get rid of dissections, but we don't have, and we have not had ever, anybody whose job or whose volunteer position was specifically related to dissections. If we had someone working on this issue constantly, I'm sure that we could get dissections out of a lot of schools, and we could educate a lot of schools, students, teachers about frog conservation via the frog dissection issue. So we're looking for dissection volunteers, whether you're on the call right now or watching this on YouTube. If you're really into this issue, then I think it's a great way to benefit for animal welfare, animal rights, wildlife conservation, environmental education. It covers so many categories. Okay, so it looks like we have no more questions. So to conclude this call, I want to just give you an update on upcoming Save the Frogs events, including classes that we will be offering through Save the Frogs Academy, which this is Save the Frogs Academy, is savethefrogs.com/academy, or just go to our homepage and find the Academy link. September 11th, which is this Wednesday, I am going to be talking all about the chytrid fungus, which I talked about briefly today. And that was the focus of my PhD research. I spent 4 years in Australia researching the ecology of chytridiomycosis in Eastern Australia. So I'll be talking about what I did for my PhD research, which I very seldom discuss, and most people probably don't know the specifics of how I got to where I am currently, and give you a lot of information about the chytrid fungus, which is the causative agent of many, many extinctions around the world and is one of the most significant environmental problems of the 21st century. And we will have a very special guest, Susan Jewell from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who is in charge of Lacey Act issues, which is essentially the federal government's way of regulating harmful species and specifically their importation into the USA and transport across state lines. And amphibians are being considered under the Lacey Act. They're proposed to be listed because amphibians can be carriers of chytridiomycosis, which can cause lots of problems. So she's going to update us about U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service efforts to deal with the chytrid fungus. September 15th, Brianna Bender, Save the Frogs Pacific Northwest coordinator, will be leading a class all about how to set up a rally in your city, an event, a frog protest, whether it's a protest or a rally, some kind of public event. She led our atrazine rally in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago. She's run 2 5K races. She's organized 2 Save the Frogs Day 5K races in Seattle. She set up Frog Legs protests in Virginia. And we'll also have Nurul Islam of Save the Frogs Bangladesh talking about how he got about 12 different universities to be holding events for Save the Frogs Day, many of which were rallies that were basically marches or parades through very large cities in Bangladesh. So it's great to have the knowledge of how to organize events. And we want you to have that knowledge because none of us had any of this knowledge when we started. We just went out and organized the events. So how about let's pass that knowledge on to you so that you'll be even better at it than we are. September 18th, anyone who wants to volunteer for Save the Frogs. If you want to be a volunteer, if you want to be an intern, if you want to learn how Save the Frogs operates internally, that's what we're going to be talking about and how to get branches set up. Save the Frogs Ghana, Save the Frogs Bangladesh, Save the Frogs Mexico. Maybe you want Save the Frogs Texas or Save the Frogs Johnson County or Save the Frogs Johnson High School. Whatever it is, whatever level of Save the Frogs organization you want in your local community or country, we're going to be talking about how to do that and how you can volunteer and fit into that in a way that's most effective for you and for Save the Frogs. September 22nd will be all about our efforts in Ghana in West Africa. I'm going to be on the line. Michael Starkey will be on the line, and Gilbert Adam will be on the line. Gilbert leads our programs in Ghana. He's an amphibian biologist, extremely dedicated to the environment and doing a great job in Ghana. Both Michael and myself went to Ghana, so we'll be talking about our experiences there, talking about what we do in Ghana and how you can get involved, whether you are in Ghana or living internationally, because there's lots of ways for people to help. September 25th, we've got a double header. We'll be talking about the Sharp Park wetlands with Brent Plater, who's executive director of Wild Equity Institute. He's an environmental lawyer. He's got lots of experience in environmental law, in campaigns, and we're going to be talking about Sharp Park, where I've personally led I led one protest. We had a Drumming for the Frogs event there, which was a protest because the city of San Francisco is draining the Sharp Park wetlands and causing lots of problems for endangered frogs and snakes. And we're also going to be talking about bullfrogs, which we're working on getting banned, the importation of bullfrogs into California. And we're going to have Save the Frogs Advisory Committee member Chris Berry. He's a biologist, and he works for the Water Department of Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz County Fish and Game Commission. And he's very knowledgeable about legislation and politics, and that's what's necessary to get these bullfrogs banned. So he's been of huge assistance in our bullfrog campaign. So that should be really interesting. And other stuff happening October 2nd, it's not yet up on the website. We're going to have San Francisco State University biologist and professor Vance Vredenberg talking about the mountain yellow-legged frogs, which are critically endangered. And there's a lot of political issues going on right now regarding protecting those frogs. And there are many people in California who don't want protections for those frogs. So it's a really important topic right now. October 13th, we're also going to be discussing mountain yellow-legged frogs. Frank Santana, a biologist from the San Diego Zoo, will be on the line to talk about that. October 9th will be all about getting teachers involved in Save the Frogs efforts. So if you know any teachers, definitely please invite them to join us on October 9th to talk about the multitude of ways that teachers can help save the frogs, regardless of their educational or frog background. So I'm going to leave it right there. We've got lots of other stuff happening. You can check all that out on the Save the Frogs events page. And I'll put in one final call for questions or comments. And if no one raises their hand in the next 5 seconds or so, then we will call that a day. So I thank all of you. My name is Dr. Kerry Kriger. I'm the founder and executive director of Save the Frogs. I am a person who has never dissected a frog and has no plans to. And I thank you all for listening to this discussion about frog dissections. And please go check out savethefrogs.com/dissections. And I look forward to seeing you and talking with you on these Save the Frogs Academy classes, online classes that are free and take place every Sunday at 5 p.m. California time and every Wednesday, 11 a.m. California time. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Thanks for helping save the frogs.